hear the music. That must mean one thing, Zed.
What is it?
It's Freightonomics time.
Freightonomics time, 2 o'clock every Wednesday.
Can't miss it.
When things get real. Oh, and there we are. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freightonomics on Wednesday. What day is it again? Is it Wednesday?
It's Wednesday. It's Wednesday. We're in the right place. Right time. Right place.
I know it's getting confusing in these crazy times, but yeah, this is the only way that I know what day of the week it is.
It's like that sometimes. I mean, I think that's been the sentiment that I've heard from a lot of people, friends and colleagues. It's like all the days are kind of just starting to mesh together, especially when you're living in like this Corona world.
This Rona world
that we're living in. You don't know if it's Monday. You don't know if it's Tuesday. What day? You just lose all concept of time. You just know you got work to do and meetings to attend.
I think we're finding out it doesn't really matter.
No, it's going to get done.
Well, we got a big show today, so welcome to Freightonomics, everybody, the podcast where we combine freight and economics.
That's right.
And discuss their impact on the world. And today we've got a really good show.
Yeah.
We've got some special guests today coming up that we're going to dive into how the coronavirus is starting to really, impact the supply chain. So we've got Mike McNamara.
Right.
Former CEO of Flex, which was a supply chain management company, and he's gotten involved into Clear AI, again, artificial intelligence, how to improve the supply chain through artificial intelligence, and PCH International. So all of these things are really supply chain centric. So again, and they're around the globe. It's not necessarily everything that's happening domestically, as we've all talked about on this show numerous times. We are not just isolated to our specific niches, our specific industries, our specific, domestic environment in the United States. We are connected to this global environment. A lot of the products we have are made in China, as we've talked about ad nauseum.
Yeah.
I know that's a big secret, especially to our colleague Mike Vincent, who said that no, everything is absolutely made in America, more specifically Tennessee, where he lives. He does not understand that there is a huge world outside of his house,
right,
that actually impacts the way that he purchases TVs and big giant piles of wood to build giant swing set out back for his family.
A swing set.
Swing sets.
So he says.
All right. He thinks it's all made and manufactured like down the road somewhere.
I'm not buying it.
No. So we've got that to talk about. We've also got some obviously economics right now is kind of a big topic.
Yeah, it's a big topic. And the thing is with a lot of the economic stuff right now is that the data can't really keep up with the current events because it's happening at such a rapid clip. We're seeing things develop on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. A lot of times we're looking at macroeconomic measures. They're monthly releases. I mean, the biggest weekly release that we have is, of course, weekly jobless claims, which has been very, very, I think, newsworthy as of late, of course, over the last 2 weeks. Slightly, and very impactful. I mean, we were looking at jobless claims of the last 2 weeks, looking at it's hitting at the 10 million mark near thereabouts. And so there's still a lot to go because we have weekly jobless claims coming out tomorrow. So we could be looking at another record-breaking number potentially.
I mean, I would assume that we're expecting another record-breaking number.
Yeah.
Where do you think that we're going to hit some sort of plateau? Do you think we're coming to that yet?
I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I think one of the other areas that I'm really a little bit worried about is all of these claims coming in, these initial jobless claims coming in. And I think we mentioned this on a previous show, was those things actually being processed and the systems kind of being jammed up and overwhelmed. So that's going to be definitely a big issue. Also, as always, I am keeping my eye on the LinkedIn at all times to see if there are any comments or questions throughout the show. So be a participant.
Yeah, come on in and ask us questions as things go, especially as we're talking to Mike McNamara. And also, JT Engstrom, our chief strategy officer here at FreightWaves, is going to join the conversation as well. Now, JT, of course, has gotten loads of experience manufacturing toys. I mean, sorry. In the investment sector, in the private equity sector. Of course, he'll be joining the conversation with Mike here in a few minutes. Just to give a little bit of extra perspective to the conversation. You're an economist.
Yes.
I'm a trucking guy. We need somebody from the financial sector to really give us some perspective here, especially when talking to somebody with the vast experience of somebody like Mike McNamara. So,
right.
We also are going to talk about what's happening in the current freight market. Obviously, It is a extremely volatile time. We're seeing volumes drop dramatically. We're seeing capacity tighten, then loosen. We're not really sure what to make of it. How long is it going to last, et cetera? We'll talk about that. But first up, Anthony, I think we need to get things going.
Yeah.
Let's call Mike and JT and see what's going on.
What's JT up to?
I don't know what he's doing right now.
I haven't heard from him in a while.
Let's call him real quick and see what he's got going on. While I'm calling these guys, let's see if
I don't think he gave me his right cell phone number.
No,
he gave you the right one.
Yeah,
just like him. It just sounds like him.
Here we go. Oh, technology. All right, so we're calling Mike, and then we'll call JT and conference him in real quick. But
perfect.
Hey, Mike.
All right. Hey, Mike. How are you doing, man? It's Zach and Anthony.
All right.
Fantastic. You can hear me, so I'm going to conference JT right in. These crazy times with all the remote activity.
I know. I'm getting used to it.
Right. All right. Let's get JT in on this conversation.
Excellent.
Zach, good afternoon.
Oh, hey, JT. How are you doing, man?
Very well, thank you. The toy manufacturing is off the charts.
I'm a little bit... JT never picks up when I call.
Oh, well, now he does. All you have to do is suggest a podcast. So, right. Mike, JT, you guys on and ready to go?
Yeah.
You can hear me, right, Mike?
Yep.
All right, so let's kick things off. So, I mean, we entered the show and talked about how supply chains have really become, a big factor in all of this. And obviously, we talked before the show about, some of the medical supplies, obvious impacts to that. And things have trouble flexing up and down. Now, not to make a pun on your former job as Flex CEO, but what are some of the areas that supply chains are, currently having trouble, or might have trouble with this coronavirus outbreak that you've seen so far? I mean, you've had vast amount of experience in managing supply chains, helping improve them. What are some of the things that you think that are a little weak at this point?
Hi. First of all, thanks for having me on your show. We appreciate it. Supply chains are inherently complicated, and the one thing that we're starting to realize that once we step on the accelerator here, that you start to realize what all the constraints lie base, whether they're the underlying components that are actually the assembly areas, whether the assembly area capacity itself, where these parts are actually coming from, how easy it is to get these parts through and export and those kind of things. So what this thing is doing is really seeing a little bit of a visibility on the problem. That supply chains are inherently complex, and that unless they're properly profiled, and unless you can actually create and understand the interdependencies all the way through to the component supply base, that when you try to turn on the accelerator to ramp them, you don't know if it's gonna ramp or not. I mean, it's really showing the underlying complexities of how supply chains really work.
Yeah, that's
yeah, Mike, thank you for that introduction. This is JT. In your experience, which I know is vast, can you talk to us a little bit about how, when getting products to market, the final assembly is obviously critical, but the components that go into those assemblies and the subcomponents within those can be sometimes the origination of the issue or the capacity constraint with developing final product, and how you're looking at mapping networks to understand where there may be product shortages as a result of subcomponents versus the actual final goods.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the true problems of not having complete visibility all the way through multiple constituents in the supply chain. Unless you can actually map all the way through the assembly process, the inventory near the final assembler, and all the way back to the component supply, you don't really know if you have supply chain. You really don't know if you have any resiliency or security in that supply. And those underlying components, let's take ventilators as a good example because that's front and center today. You might have 10 manufacturers doing ventilators. They may be willing to ramp their capacity in the final assembly factory. But if all 10 of those ventilator manufacturers are going all the way back to 3 component suppliers that may be buried in wherever, somewhere else in the supply chain in China, for example, the constraint actually becomes the component, not the final assembly capacity. And unless you can map that, unless you can see that there's these component suppliers that are actually feeding multiple final assembly factories, and unless you can map all the way back to that component supplier and understand those capacities and that resiliency of that component supplier, then you really don't know if your supply chain is secure. And this was really evident as well back in the Japan tsunami, where it ended up shutting down what many different assembly plants from many different manufacturers, but it was a result of only a few component suppliers in Japan. And everybody had their own backup plans for some of their assembly factories, but nobody really had understood that those underlying components actually fed multiple manufacturers. And it's why we think it's so important today. One of the people that I'm a strategic advisor is Clear AI. And what they're trying to do is really create a supply chain for the world. And unless you grab the supply chain, and until you create a real graph of where those components are, where the assembly factories are, where the inventories are, you don't actually know if you have the security in your supply chain, and you don't really know how you can accelerate it when you get in a period of crisis like we are in today.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you for that overview, Mike. If we were to expand on this a little bit and tie it directly to supply chain interruptions, whether it be due to weather events or to country-specific events, regional-specific events, which might overlap, we talk a little bit about how the need for both visibility into the impact of disruptions play into the ability to fulfill demand for production capacity, one. Two, how supply chains can hedge their risk to these disruptions through various elements of inventory stocking, while also understanding that stocking inventory can be expensive. And then also knowing that during periods of disruption, while production footprints may be disrupted, so may also transportation capacity. And so there's a lot of different factors that play into this when you look at the global macro international supply chain as it pertains to fulfillment of specific product demands at the categorical level.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to say this. I had a very difficult time during those last comments. There's some echo on the line. Sorry. Can you just give me the highlights real quickly again?
Yeah, so what we just outlined was when we try to dissect the disruption impact of the global supply chain, how do we think about tethering through from final assembly through subcomponent inventory, perhaps to even a level a bit deeper to understand where capacity constraints actually inhibit final production and assembly and provisioning to market, and how supply chains can hedge out the risk through various factors, one of which I mentioned could be, safety stocking of inventory.
Yeah. What you mentioned is, some of the ways of building in the additional supply chain resiliency. So I think the different elements, you have supply, you have final assembly supply, you have inventory in between those pieces, you have distribution inventory, and then, there's different consumption models. But managing that whole system is what is really required of like a modern, and visibility and transparency into each of those events. So it's not only the capacities of the factories, the locations of the factory, the capacities of the factory, the key component technologies and where they're built, the inventories between each of those, and where it's actually finally manufactured, and the inventory in between that and the distribution channel, and then how much is the distribution channel. So it's the only way to do that is to map and map that entire system. And that's actually what DEMA's trying to do today. I was actually at DEMA headquarters 2 weeks ago for 2 days, right in the headquarters, Washington, D.C. And when they look to prioritize distribution of goods or need, they can't actually do it because they don't have the supply chain graph resilience. And as a result, they actually can't do a proper distribution of where of the most need, because they don't have visibility all the way through the supply chain with multiple companies in that system, whether it's freight forwarder, with distributor, whether it's the guy moving the inventory or the manufacturer of the component. That's exactly what is really needed today. And I think this is, it's entirely fascinating to me. And 25 years at Flex and years as CEO, I'm understanding supply chain. And when I came out of that, I just said, wow, the thing that I really need to spend time on is this whole concept of supply chain resiliency. And that's why I love the idea of, getting affiliated with Clear, becoming a strategic advisor, because they're trying to map that. And at the same time, I'm also strategic advisor at PCH International, who's trying to, right now, for PCH, map the supply base. Like, where are all the suppliers? Where are they located? What are the capacities? To literally map the entire supply chain system. And it's only when you can look at the industry as cumulative total and be able to get that data into one aggregated platform where you can then pull the insights and find the cohorts that you can only do with, really managing data and using data science. It's only in managing those cohort data that you can actually get to the insights and be able to get the actions that you need to build supply chain resiliency. This is exactly what the medical industry needs right now. And it's what I've been working on at Flex. So how do I think about, adding value in the supply chain? Because at Flex, I got so many different supply chains in my industry that it's only through the visibility of all the data, of all the constituencies, that you can actually get real outcomes.
Now that's pretty fascinating right there. It sounds like what you're talking about is the fact that people simply take for granted all the stuff that happens upstream of the supply chain, that it's just going to show up at their facility, whether they are a manufacturer, retailer, et cetera. And they don't necessarily understand, all the upstream effects of what's happening, say, in China. Maybe they don't have full visibility into what their supply chain, has going on inside of it. Maybe there's a particular piece made in South Korea that gets shipped to China, that gets shipped to India, et cetera, so on and so forth, that they just don't have clear visibility into, so they don't understand the full risks of what's happening in each sector of their supply chain. Is that accurate, Mike?
Yeah, it's really accurate. And think about, the pharmaceutical industry now that's coming under a lot of pressure because they're finding some of the components of the drug are actually only done in China. And people are saying, and people are just now bringing this data to light. They're now studying the supply chains because they're trying to hit the accelerator and they're trying to ramp those supply chains. They're finding it's very difficult. And they understand now risk associated with the component supply choices that you have. And the pharmaceutical industry is a great example of an industry that absolutely needs a supply chain graph and analytics to really understand the cumulative effects of that industry. And it's only in understanding those cumulative effects that you're going to get the right, the right data to be able to manage. And hopefully, you should be able to find ways where the industry itself can have benefits as a result of having this cumulative platform. So there's always a platform effect benefit of the members as everybody puts their data into and building this graph and really understand. But these kind of like PPE, ventilators, drugs. I mean, these are great industries where it absolutely needs a coordinated effort to understand the risk, the resiliency of the supply chain. Even in those particular products, it's actually driving into national security. So to me, it should be a really high priority of the world itself, particularly in the United States, who is well advanced in many of these techniques. And it has a very dispersed supply chain and very distributed supply chain. So this is what kind of the next world is. It's like what I've been working on, and is a step of modernizing the supply chain and world of data.
Yeah, Mike, I think I have one more that comes to mind, and that is, how would you categorize the current state of visibility into these supply chain links, and how material the impact of disruptions can be on them?
Yeah, I think there's more and more visibility, but once you get across industry and cross companies, it gets to be very complicated. People are protective of their data, so you'll get more and more visibility and transparency within the trucking industry or within a distribution system that's bringing products from Asia into the United States. So you get continually more visibility as a result of the tools and techniques of the world. But if you don't extend it all the way to where's the supply base located that you're actually pulling those parts in, that tends to be a different supplier, a different company, a different set of IT tools, and it gets complicated. So it's really hard to advance that agenda when you're moving across industries, across companies. It's only in being able to aggregate that data that you actually get to the end objective. So I think it's getting better, and a lot of companies are making a lot of progress, getting more visibility, but nobody's really got end-to-end supply visibility that is reliable and really built to build a really secure supply chain and understand the supply chain so that you can make the choices you need to make that supply chain more resilient, either through different suppliers, or better suppliers, more suppliers, or have them located geographically in a better way.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's really good stuff, guys. So, Mike, you're a strategic advisor for Clear AI, which is clear artificial intelligence, which is really driving a lot of these initiatives towards developing visibility into supply chains. Give us a quick plug on what you guys are working on right now, especially as supply chain visibility becomes increasingly important, in these times where we've got a crazy virus running rampant throughout the world right now. What are you guys really seeing right now or spearheading that's going to help with that in the future?
Well, the big initiative that we're driving right now is within the supply chain itself. We're trying to profile all the aggregate the data. Now to actually make a difference. So the more we can get partners on board to share that data, where they can get the benefit of a platform effect, that's something that Clear is working on directly. So Clear has a dedicated initiative around the medical, and right now working with the NHS to actually profile them. So that's a major entree into the supply chain is working with them, but also talking to many other agencies at the moment to try to profile that data, and also other manufacturers and distributors to be able to bring that data on board. So if I was to say one thing we could do is what we could make available to everybody the information that we need to get this supply chain profile. We in order to maintain our national security or each country maintains national security, they're really going to have to profile supply chain. They're going to have to create a graph of the supply chain in order to ensure the resiliency and the security. So this is a message we need to get out. People are starting to see it, and they're leading right now in terms of trying to profile that data for the medical industry.
Oh, that's incredible. So basically, you're trying to aggregate as much information, get as many partners on board, so everybody can be more reactive, obviously make a quicker impact into what's going on and react to what's going on in the environment around them. So that's really good stuff. Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us so much, and JT, as always.
Thank you.
You guys have a
thank you guys.
Yeah, you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it is, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Talk soon. Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Yep.
Riveting
stuff, Anthony. That's the only way I can explain it. Now, I'm gonna tell a quick story. As I regale the audience here with, I used to think that, much like I made fun of my friend Mike Vincent earlier about thinking that everything just came from his backyard, but I was no different back in the day, Anthony.
Yeah.
I didn't think about, different aspects of how does this freight get to where it is, what's interacting with it, how does that impact me? It would have made me 1,000% better at my job if I had just thought about what was going on more than 10 miles down the road from me. And I think that's really the lesson here, and that's what Mike and his team are working on right now, is how do you become more aware of your surroundings? We're sitting on the third rock from the sun. If we didn't know that the universe was interacting around us, we would not be as effective as we are today.
Right.
And that's really what he's talking about in terms of supply chain management. So I think we're becoming a little bit more exposed to our ignorance of the supply chain, and what that actually means. I mean, for me, before I came to FreightWaves, I really just thought of supply chain like some 201 class in university, and I was just like, oh, that's just some jargony term. Well, no, that's actually a big, long string of events that impacts every single person along the way. And it doesn't matter who you are. You could be a shipper, carrier, manufacturer, call it what you want in terms of language, but every single piece of that has a downstream or upstream impact on what you do. I mean, retailers sell the products. They put your product out there into the world, into the environment, allow you and me to go in and see the product quickly, creating demand, interest, etc. But the people that make it further upstream, maybe they're in Taiwan, if they don't produce anything, then you don't get your Swatch watch that you got in 1983.
Right.
So yeah, I think that was pretty important stuff, especially to talk about right now when we're seeing various aspects of the supply chain really hit in at different points along the line.
Yeah.
We watched China have basically shut down right around Chinese New Year. We were like, oh, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. Oh wait, maybe not. Now the demand side of things has been cut off because we're all sitting in our houses, watching Zoom and crazy podcasts at 2:00 on a Wednesday afternoon.
Right.
So
I mean, I definitely agree with that when we're talking about looking at the supply chain as a whole, because it's so complex, and it's not just one. It's not just, you're not just doing addition and subtraction here. It's not like you can just put up a plant and expect to fix all problems. You have other variables, other aspects to kind of really target, especially when we're looking at factories converting efforts to produce things in the medical field. It's not just them putting those things in place. It's also about sourcing the material. Then how long does it take that material to get to that destination of that factory? And then it's so many other aspects of just like one or two different variables to it. And so looking at the entire supply chain, as you mentioned, stuff that Mike McNamara is looking at is it's a lot. It's complex, and there's a lot to it.
And we as Americans, I think, kind of take that for granted. I know I did. You don't think about all the different components and going into your Apple phone, your iPhone or whatever it is, and different parts of that are manufactured through in different parts of the world. Well, they all have to come together at some point in time. And if one country they're peaking their coronavirus outbreak, they're shut down even though everybody else is doing okay. And I think this is a microcosm of what's going to happen here in the next 7-8 months. We're going to see countries having different peaks, different influences from the coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it, moving forward. So let's transition and talk about something that's, a big concern here moving forward is the small businesses in the United States. Now, we talked about this in the past.
Yeah.
And small businesses, especially you carriers out there, 93% of you classify as a small business.
Yeah.
So 93% of the carriers out there are in a small business, whether you like it or not. And, the government has, hopefully provided you with some form of flotation device as we wade these rough waters moving forward. What are we looking at here in the near term? I mean, we just had the stimulus package, but
yeah, and so I think that was one of the areas that we were looking at closely before as the stimulus package was being proposed, what it would mean for the United States and what it would mean for us financially, and of course for those individuals that might be furloughed and so or completely laid off or fired.
Right.
So when we're looking at that, our initial thoughts were, I remember, it was like, okay, of course, it's nice if these big businesses get it because, they are a big part of the GDP, but they're not the big part of actual employed numbers. So when we're looking at small businesses, they're going to employ the mass amount of Americans. And so
right.
That's going to be the target. We need to find a way to get money into those Americans' hands so they could actually pay those bills and afford to pay their rent and all these other things, especially
because the big businesses are nothing if people aren't buying their goods.
Exactly.
And that's who employs the people that are buying their goods.
Small businesses.
There we go.
And that's been really jammed up as of late, seeing that the most recent stimulus package hasn't really been as effective as anticipated or really kind of what was intended for small businesses. So I know there's another potential stimulus in the works, potentially of floating around the number of $250 billion for small businesses specifically. They're reckoning at being able to offer those payments to keep employees employed.
Now, where do they need to target? What did they miss with this first stimulus that they need to address in the next one potentially?
So I think the target was missed on being able to provide those payment programs for small businesses. So somehow that did not go as intended. And so I think that's what this whole $250 billion potential rollout is looking at hitting and targeting specifically. And that's really going to be critical. And because these are individuals, many of them are going week to week to week.
Yep.
And we're already in week 3, 4, going on 5 now, of potential people that have already been impacted by layoffs. Of course, region by region is going to vary. But when we're looking at those who are going to need this kind of stimulus the most, we're looking at those Americans that are working in those those consumer-facing roles. We're looking at retail. We're looking at hospitality, leisure, restaurants, things like that.
People that aren't working right now.
People that aren't working right now.
They can't get their stuff. So, yeah, and the jobless claims obviously going to continue to rise. We talked about that earlier in the show. What do you anticipate? This is going to look like here in the next couple of weeks or so. Do you think we're going to see another? I mean, obviously, you think we're going to see another record week? I
think potentially we could see maybe up to 7 million. I mean,
wow.
Who knows? Sky's the limit at this point. I mean, we would want to at least start to hope to see some kind of tick down, especially after that whole stimulus package was rolled out. Of course, that's going to take time to kind of really hit everything. Mm-hmm. But I mean, hopefully it's not another record-breaking week. Hopefully it's still under that 6 million number, which is crazy to think. But yeah, we could be looking at something around 7 million. That's.
Do we have a breakdown on who? Do we have a breakdown on who specifically is in that unemployment number? Do we have any real detailed statistics on that just yet, or are we just assuming that large part of it is obviously like the restaurant,
mm-hmm.
As you said, the service industry type employers? Now we have seen some industries have a lot of hiring. The restaurant, or not the restaurant, but the grocery sector seems to be on a hiring spree. Amazon is doing fine. Carriers, of course, have had kind of, depending on the sector that they're involved in, they've had kind of a solid March,
right?
Which actually might show up in the first quarter numbers to an extent. I think we're going to see some real divergent numbers in the first quarter in terms of those who have had good quarters and bad quarters, especially on the transportation side of things. The some carriers who have a lot of consumer products, et cetera, involved, some of the food warehouses and all that stuff, have probably had a really good quarter. Yeah. Which is going to be deceptive going into Q2, which I think everybody is going to eventually feel, the full brunt of the coronavirus impact here in Q2. But, we've watched volumes really fall here in the last couple of weeks. It's probably been a week and a half now that we've come off peak around March 23rd, according to our outbound tender volume index here at FreightWaves that we track. And it's come down really fast. Andrew Cox wrote a really good piece about the disproportionate decline versus the rise. We had, as sharp as that increase in volumes was, it's still not as quick as the decline in volumes.
Right.
And, it's only taken a matter of days. I talked about it the other day on the coronavirus special here, that we do on Tuesdays and Thursdays at FreightWaves HQ. I lost a bet with Craig.
Yeah.
I haven't officially lost it yet, but all signs point to me losing it. Our outbound tender volume index, of course, has a base value of about 10,000, which started March 1st, 2018. And we generally see things hover between about 9,500 in the slow season to about 10,500, 600, 700 in the busy active times. So those would be the times around June when volumes are really peaking, around Christmas, et cetera. We have had some bumps up around Labor Day and things like that. Again, we have not had a real regular pattern of freight. As seasonal as we believe that the freight market is, it does have quite a bit of volatility in it outside of seasonality over the last 2 years or so. I think we really, I myself, and speaking from experience, got spoiled with a very consistent pattern in the freight market. And what I mean by that is that we had volumes kind of increase in March and, go into June, and we had a good month or so. And then August, things are still pretty good. And then around November, Christmas, supply would get a little tight. And so we'd see some spot market increases. Rinse, repeat for about 7 years or so. From about 2010, 2016, we had a relatively stable pattern. The volumes kind of dropped off in 2016, et cetera. But since that time, we've had 2017, which started off really slow, then kicked off that whole 2018 thing because of the hurricanes and the booming economy, et cetera. And then 2019, super soft, overcapacity, oversupplied market, et cetera. And then we were thinking, oh man, just a month ago, or a month and a half ago, we were thinking, oh man, things are super normal here. Yeah. February, flat, and now we've got this COVID-19 outbreak to just wreck what we think about what's going to happen over the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to think about what's upcoming, but we have seen some weird anomalies, and the way that we're seeing them manifest is not necessarily the ways that you would think they would. I myself, you probably can speak to this too, didn't see the full brunt of the coronavirus impact on the economy, hence the freight market, et cetera. Did you have any? We don't really have a game plan for this, what's going on right now, do we?
From an econ standpoint, and definitely looking at policies being put in place, it's so beyond those events so you mentioned like the hurricanes, like those things are just like very localized. We can target it. We can just isolate that incident, pour all the resources in there, and get it ramped back up as fast as possible, and kind of really get things back to normal as possible within a month or two's time. Of course, the relief effort's going to take a little bit longer after that, but really kind of getting back to baseline rather quickly. When we're looking at things like this, it's difficult because those regional differences. And then on top of that, it's like, it's not a one size fits all, but it could be. But if you got to weigh that out, right? You have to weigh out what's worth shutting down completely and what's overreaction. And then is it an overreaction if it's, for the betterment of slowing the spread? And so there's all these different components that have to kind of culminate and move together. And so when we're looking at that, that's what's really making this so difficult, is that the regional variances. And then
like New York, for instance, is having a
Yes.
huge outbreak right now, whereas we're in Chattanooga, Tennessee with 83 cases.
Yeah.
It's such a vast array of discrepancy. I can't put into words what how imbalanced that is. And that's, but we're basically, quarantining at home. I mean, most of us, not us specifically, but we're, everybody is basically, sheltering at home here, just like they are in New York.
Right.
Ours is a little bit more effective, obviously, due to the fact that we are naturally more socially distant,
Right.
not inside of a city where you have 300 square foot lofts stacked on top of each other in apartment buildings. People are living, on top of each other, literally, in that environment. So it's going to be really hard to contain anything that happens up there, which, again, the majority of the population, though, lives in those areas.
Right.
But geographically speaking, we're actually doing, relatively well down here in terms of the spread of the virus, containment, et cetera. I know the hospitals down here have, actually furloughed people, but then sent those people up to New York to actually readjust. And this is a good example of supply chain redistribution. If you do have resources that you can, use in another way and source them at least temporarily to another specific, piece that could help with the situation, that's probably ideal, and especially ideal to your bottom line there in the in Q2, Q3 as we see coming up. Now, I think we've seen some changes in inventory levels, even though that China was effectively shut down for a month. Is that accurate?
Yeah, especially
So
when we're
this
looking
is
at
positive news. Ish.
Yeah, positive news-ish. I mean, we've definitely seen, I think, China come back online with more activity. We've seen even stories, of course, on different headlines. You can take some of them with a grain of salt, of course, but seeing that the spread is kind of almost slowed completely in China, and Wuhan's back and open and running. All this other good stuff. So seeing that import activity starting to ramp back up, I think, of course, is giving people hope that, okay, there's an end in sight. If we can look at ground zero and they're improving, there's hope for other parts of the world as well. But when we're looking at the significant pull forward in the first half of March, or mid-March, really, because March was incredibly different from February, but even within March, it was like 2 different months.
Understatement of the podcast.
It's huge.
You win.
Huge. And so it's like, even within March is like the first half of March, mid-March, and then the end of March. And for many, it was the longest month ever on record. But it was just like, there's so many different parts to it. And so when we look at that ramp up, that pull forward, so much of that panic buying coming in, that really kind of, it threw supply chains into a frenzy. And so,
but yet we see inventory levels increase.
Inventory levels are increased. So I think now it's like almost a reaction of that anticipation of all that pull forward. But now that pull forward's happened, individuals are unfortunately being laid off, let go, furloughed. Unemployment rates are spiking. That's going to limit discretionary spending. That's going to limit the amount of panic buying. And then on top of that, panic's going to subside after you've gotten your 18th pack of family size or edition toilet paper. It's like you're running out of, you're set. You're good to go. And so I think as we see fewer and fewer, goods being hauled straight from port to those final destinations, potentially, we're going to see a lot more ramping up and increasing in warehouses. And that's definitely something we've seen in the Logistics Managers Index. From the good folks over at, I think, Colorado State, Arizona State, University of Reno, Nevada, Rutgers. I think I might be forgetting one. Rochester Institute of Technology. Shout out to Zach and Dale Rogers, of course. Where I think we're going to try to get them on here.
Yes, we need to, especially Zach. He's got a great name.
Yeah. He spells it Z-A-C.
That's fine.
He's cool.
Yeah, I'm into that.
I think when we're looking at inventory levels, they're growing again after there was a contraction in February. So when we're looking at that, it just kind of speaks to the vast difference between February, early March, mid-March, late March, to now April, where it's a complete different environment now that we're in April compared to just the end of March. We're seeing volumes starting to come down and that entire environment happening.
I'm actually shocked that we're seeing inventory levels increase. I mean, again, I know that we're really biased towards what we've seen with the consumer products and the food warehouses, et cetera. Food warehouses obviously have a lot higher turnover rate than that of traditional retail or any other kind of, manufacturing inventory. They try to keep that as slim as possible in those areas. But, it does kind of, I think, give me hope for a quicker recovery in terms of having inventory levels up. I don't know what specific inventory levels we're talking about. Right. I love my detail on that. But at the same time, we're about to enter a month or a period of time where trucking volumes are going to be significantly depressed. And I don't know what that looks like at this point in time. I think, some of the things that I've worked with here over the last little bit have us bottoming out around a level 30% lower year over year, which is way lower than, what we experienced last year. So last May, we experienced a pretty strong bottoming in the market right after, the trade war situation escalated around May 10th, and we dropped to about a 5% lower level. So a 30% lower level of freight volume would be, catastrophic in my mind. Like that would mean that, carriers really need to tighten their belts a lot more than they did. I mean, they really didn't have the bandwidth to do that in, depending on their exposure to different industries, obviously. But, some of the carriers that had a lot of Procter & Gamble or, Kimberly-Clark or anything that's, upstream of all these medical supplies, et cetera, that are moving with any volume in the United States, they obviously had really good marches. But then again, that's going to be followed by, unless, again, you're hauling food and medical supplies specifically related to the COVID outbreak, you're really going to have to buckle down here in the next couple of months. And, just like Mike was talking about, earlier in the show, supply chains are dramatically exposed to this fluctuation in volume, activity. Supplies cannot simply, if you're a carrier, you have 30 trucks, say 10% of your business, operates with consumer goods. The other 90% are basically, either going to have to be redistributed to those consumer products, growing the business on that scale. And then you're going to have some sort of leftover amount that you don't have a lot to do with. Yeah. The problem is that those consumer goods now that you've got that part figured out and you say, okay, I've got 20 of you that can now work on the toilet paper carrying. Yeah. Now everybody's got their toilet paper, but also all of the toilet paper is going into the major metro areas, into the major distribution centers for toilet paper, and there's no manufacturing coming out. Yeah. So now you've got a deadhead out of those markets with nothing, right. But you cannot charge too little. Like you're literally going to have to bottom your rates. Now it's going to be a double-edged sword here because you're probably going to see a lot of capacity come offline here in the next 2 months. Yeah, it's happening all over the country in various industries. We're even seeing it in the health industry where people are being furloughed, laid off, redistributed where they can as people are shut down. But to get all of that back online, with any quickness is going to be a challenge for anybody, especially in the carrier side. I mean, we were talking about it on the show earlier in the way that you cannot simply just flip a switch and everything's back to where it was. Right. These are going to be intermittent fluctuations in both supply and demand. And we're seeing that actually exhibited in both the air and maritime sectors right now already. Yeah. So the air cargo, international air cargo, international shippers, maritime carriers, I should say, the container ships that are coming from China, Europe, et cetera, their rates are actually going up right now. Why do you think that is?
I think is capacity starting to tighten, and also when we look at air, there's less pedestrian flights.
Supply side contraction, something that the trucking industry has no experience with whatsoever outside of a forcible situation. Yeah. So air passengers, absolutely a forcible situation. That is, they were shut down. They can't travel anymore. Air cargo rates start spiking to above seasonal highs in March. And we're still watching those continue to increase, especially on the China to North America as medical equipment. Again, air cargo is going to be your higher value goods, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, electronics. Not as much electronic shipping right now, but high demand. They're going to need that as fast as possible because we're talking about human lives here. So they need all of those ventilators, all of those pharmaceuticals coming in as fast as possible. They've got FEMA money backing them. You know, that's going to create a big upstream impact on that supply chain as they try to produce enough to meet demand. But then what's going to happen?
Is there going to be oversupply? I mean,
eventually
too much capacity?
I know it doesn't feel like it, but eventually
One of these days it's going to happen?
We will be through this.
Yeah.
And
the pendulum's going to swing.
And we're probably going to have a lot of pharmaceuticals that we don't need. We're probably going to have a lot of ventilators sitting around. Those beds we were using, to help treat these patients, they're not going to be needed as much. We're going to have to change.
Yeah.
And things are going to have to go back the way they were. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about supply chain volatility, is the fact that every piece of the puzzle is going to have some sort of wave that they got to ride. And the maritime and air cargo guys, they're going to have to ride it too.
Yeah.
Maritime has a little bit more control than the air cargo side of things, however. Talking to Henry Byers, obviously one of our market experts here,
Brilliant
shout out to Henry. It's a crazy environment to operate on the international shipping lanes, especially when you're talking about them canceling sailings. I mean, it doesn't necessarily translate. Higher rates does not necessarily translate to more profit in this specific environment. The airlines are not making a lot more money because they're charging, 300% more. They're not. They're going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
But they have to charge that much more because the limited amount of capacity that they can only afford to operate is now in higher demand, but only in specific aspects.
Right.
So it's not just this big oversupply situation. There's going to be a wave that they ride to. The rates are going to come back down. It's just going to be a very tough environment to operate in here over the next few months or so. And the carriers, they're going to go through a trough.
Yeah.
Probably for the next couple of months. I don't know if that 30% number that I threw out is accurate or not. I have no way of knowing that. But the pace that we're operating on right now, things do appear, and here in the last 2 days, volumes do appear to be slowing their decline a little bit more than I expected. So we may not hit that 30% number, but as long as we're shut down as a country, that's only going to make that trough that much deeper potentially moving forward.
Right. And I think one of the things you just hit on earlier was once this all kind of comes to the other side of things, you can't just hit that switch and just like, okay, everything's fine now. You can come out, business as usual, resume. You can't just, after hitting that pause button, just hit play and expect things to just kind of operate as it was, like nothing ever happened. And so I think that kind of harkens back to one of the conversations we had maybe last week or even the week before. We're talking about the stimulus packages. What kind of incentives? Because there's going to need to be some kind of incentive to pull consumers out of their shells, to pull businesses out, to incentivize small business owners or former small business owners that were discouraged because they had to shut their doors. They don't want to take on any kind of liability like that. They just had to let go of all these people. They're feeling awful about it. The last thing they want to do is maybe just, hey, let's have another go at it, And so there's going to be some incentive for those small business owners, for companies to ramp up, give them a reason to ramp up hiring, give them a reason to invest in capital goods again. And so that's going to be another aspect, I think, another variable when we're looking at the other side of this thing of not just you can't flip the switch, but how can we incentivize individuals and really make them feel supported, like, okay, it's all right to resume business as usual here.
So what is the impact of all this? Normally the economy thrives on activity. You have to transition that money. The movement of money, the flow of funds is really what drives an economic growth. What do you think that we really need to focus on here in the next little bit? What do you think they're doing right, if they are doing something right with the stimulus packages? What do you think those things are that will help those small businesses, will keep people employed, because in my opinion, keeping people employed as high of a rate as possible is crucial to the recovery aspect of this. What do you think they're doing right or wrong, or et cetera?
I mean, it's all going to come down to, so the intentions are one thing, and then whether or not it pans out is another.
Right.
But I think the good thing is the emphasis being on essential. And so looking at the focus on the medical equipment and really focusing on these hotbed areas, I think that's what's really being done right. The other thing that I think that was being done right, or with the great intentions of the unemployment package, was to increase the total for the weekly unemployment dollar amount, and then extend the life of how long someone could be on those certain programs. Whether or not it was effective, we're seeing headlines on the small business side that not so much, but at least for those that were unemployed, being able to see that, okay, there is an additional fund set aside to assist these workers that were on a week-to-week plan a little bit more, to help them out on their day-to-day activities, and just being at least able to pay bills. And so I think that's going to be one of the areas that has been really done well. And I think moving forward, I mean, potentially looking at how we can expect certain individuals that are on some of these unemployment plans to pay their rent, because some of them are going to be behind on rent. Is there going to be some kind of rent forgiveness program? I mean,
but doesn't that hurt the people upstream of that, the landlords, et cetera?
Definitely.
I mean, because then you can't just simply say, okay, sorry guys, you're down here at the low end of the bottom,
big time.
You know,
especially retail space. We're looking at businesses that were deemed non-essential.
Yeah.
Some of those companies or businesses are going to have to shut their doors, but they're still going to be responsible for those rent that's due for that area, that space. And so that's going to be a hard hit for many retailers and manufacturers that were renting that are considered non-essential. And so that's going to definitely be a hard pill for many individuals, and whether or not that there can be some kind of assistance. But on the retail side, no jumping around from retail to consumer, but on the retail side, a lot of them were on their last leg before all of this. I mean, you saw bankruptcies for some of the larger brick and mortar stores already. Even though e-commerce is ramping up for many of them, it's not going to be enough to really fill the gap here.
Well, one thing's for sure, though, to make this more of a positive spin, is that out of every recession, every volatile period of time, there's always something or someone that comes out of this, sparkling. There's always a winner, in these environments. We had a huge amount of growth coming out of the 2009 recession, especially on the venture capital side. Like, that was really what spurred a lot of the economic growth over the next several years. You had a lot more tech involved. People became more efficient. One of the things these moments do is clear out inefficiencies. Mm-hmm. And I think that we will see a lot of that, coming up here in the next couple of months. We will be obviously tracking where that happens. Right. We're a little too early in the process. Right now, we're still in that. It still hurts, We're still bleeding right now. Just for the moment, looks like things are getting a little bit better. But we will come out of it more than likely probably a little bit better than we were going into it. And I think that
look at that optimism, Zach.
Look at me. I have to take over for you.
Look at that optimism.
I have to be the one this week.
That sentiment.
So, but moving forward, we're obviously going to be tracking a lot of these things. This is going to be an extremely interesting time to watch here over the next month or so, just to see what kind of, what is it doing to supply chains, trucking volumes, capacity, et cetera. I mean, coming out on the backside of this, capacity stands to really kind of tighten up a lot, looking into August and, September, October, and fourth quarter, et cetera. Yeah. So, and on that note, Anthony, I think we can at least agree on one thing through all this, and that is that spicy food is some of the best thing that you can do, because it increases the amount of dopamine activity in the brain, therefore increasing the amount of endorphins and all the other positive chemicals, leading you to be a better human and better able to survive these rough times. And I am so glad that you agree with me on all that.
Zach, we just had a lovely conversation, a great podcast, and you're going to end it on that?
I'm just telling you right now.
Spicy food is awful.
Oh.
It's like torture. Why would you do... Can you end the show?
Except Jeez. You just have...
Jeez.
You have so much... I mean, I just stated facts based on science, and then you had
It's like
you had
torture.
What did you have?
It's torture. Why? You got to measure. If you have a food that can be measured on a scale of pain, what, the Scoville or whatever, for the hotness of peppers, there's no other there's not like a sour scale that I know of. There's not a sweet scale I know of.
Yeah.
There's a spicy.
You know what that pain brings you? Pleasure.
You're sick.
Pleasure. And that's kind of my analogy that I'm using, to be optimistic, is that through this strife and hard time, we're going to come out better. And
It'd be best if we had foregone it all together.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe It's not the perfect analogy. All right. Well, that'll wrap things up for this week's Freightonomics, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Spicy foods?
Spicy foods. Yeah.
Okay, the positive is I can maybe be a thermogenic.
Listen, I'm talking about emotional stability.
You don't need it.
I love emotional stability.
Nah, you don't need it. You're good to go. Just stay happy.
Pain equals pleasure.
Oh, jeez.